and welcome to everyone.
Meryl, your icon looks like a little green M&M.
What icon?
If you go to the participants window.
Oh yeah, look at that. It says M&M.
Yeah. Don't get me started. I can stay away from them, but if I have one, I'm lost.
That's the way they made it. They made it to that. That's the way.
Yeah. That's why they say, like I will have one potato chip. No, it doesn't work.
Okay, let's watch out. This is all being recorded, so come on, let's control ourselves here. Okay. We'll begin with the official introduction to our kosher salt gatherings with this story about telling stories. When the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening the world, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There, he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mezrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I am still able to say the prayer. And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to say the people once more, would go into the forest and say, I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient. And it was sufficient, and the miracle was accomplished. And then it fell to Rabbi Israel of Rizhin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. I'm unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find a place in the forest. All I can do is to tell the story. This must be sufficient. And it was sufficient. So today we have a story, and we'll see how much time that story takes, that I chose because tonight is Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, specifically on the Jewish calendar. There is an International Holocaust Memorial Day, January 27th, I think is the date. And that date is the date when Auschwitz was liberated. And that's an internationally recognized day on the calendar, on the secular calendar, to remember all of the tragic story of the Holocaust. But in Jewish terms, in terms of our story, in terms of our mourning and our sitting with this story that is, to the extent that it is our story, the date that we observe is this week, approximately a week after Pesach, and approximately a week before Yom HaAtzmaut. That's when Yom HaShoah takes place. So the story that we're going to have today is connected to that. And I have to, hold on a second, I have to do some work here. I had the file here, but I didn't open it up sufficiently. There we go. Okay. So now back to you and back to share the screen. And now we're ready. So this is a story by Aaron Appelfeld. Aaron Appelfeld was a survivor. He was a young man during the Shoah. He came to Israel afterwards and became one of the great Hebrew writers in Israel. You can tell a little bit the side here on of your screen, if you can see that. That's the original story as written in Hebrew, and here's the translation, and it's called Kitty. Again, I don't want to say too much about Appelfeld now. Let the story speak for itself. Who'd like to read, please?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Nice and slow. Just like it says in the first sentence.
Like a bar bat mitzvah kid, slow and
Right.
she was expected to read slowly and to memorize the sentences. She felt how the words hit the stone and returned to her chilled. They called her name, which rustled within her as in the starched linen dresses which made her shudder. The windows shimmered in the sharp yellowness, kindling the floor with little flames. Sometimes she felt the full impact of the air gripping the back of her neck, stifling the syllables in her mouth. But at other times, the flow increased. The good words remained within her, like a warm secret which planted itself slowly, spreading its roots. Once a day, Maria would come in. They would speak for a while. The words, for some reason, took on different proportions in the large hall, as if it were someone other than the nun who spoke them. They seemed to flow from space. She was taught French, arithmetic, and a few passages from the New Testament, a sort of catechism for beginners. In her present limited state, only repetition was of any use. Maria would sit and read with her, and Kitty tried to repeat words after her with the same inflection. Sometimes it seemed as if they really communicated, but at other times, when the child tried to overcome the difficulties of language, she would stammer in syllables, sounds which hardly seemed to come to her. Afterward, they would walk in the garden. Maria would say the names of the birds, and Kitty would repeat them after her. Sometimes it would be plants. The landscape opened into the distance, and when you looked out, you felt the height. Steps led to this place, but the child did not know this yet. Since she was living those days with the impression of a first encounter, a tree, a stone, a bedraggled bush, a tickling puddle, all these were the extension of the images from within, from the hall. But outside, the universe was slacker. Outside, she could take longer steps. She could stretch out her hand to touch a tree. When she came back from her walks, the hall looked more beautiful to her. It was always toward evening. The light here was concentrated. Its tones were fuller. It was a room full of flying angels, embellished inscriptions, which she didn't understand, but which fit into the flight of the angels, creating a flowing movement. Sometimes the sound of the organ accompanied the dance. She would return to her copybooks, intoning the
Conjugations.
conjugations, and then, in accordance with Maria's instructions, repeating the passages from the New Testament. She had still not learned to say the Vespers. In the evening, they would kneel together by the bed, momentarily silent. In the meantime, they found out that the abbess was about to pay a visit. A different atmosphere now animated the courtyard. In the rooms, one could hear the creaking of closets being moved, the sounds of scrubbing and other noises which seemed to indicate that some chained being lurked behind the heavy furniture. And whenever one tried to move it, it screamed. Maria tried to soothe her in vain. Kitty was affected by the uneasiness in the air, for even within these walls, screened off as they were by dividing walls, some contact existed which bound people together. Perhaps here, of all places, you could sometimes even hear the silence talking. One morning, the abbess arrived. Her steps reminded Kitty somehow of other sounds. Where were they from? She didn't know. The convent filled her entire life, imbuing her with its solid being, pushing out memory. At noon, she was brought before the abbess. It was in the refectory, which was different from the other halls. Waiting in the doorway for a sign, she had the opportunity to scrutinize the walls. They were in a different style. Later, she found out that the treasures of the convent were stored in this hall. Ancient paintings, gold crowns, silver lamps, and other objects unsuitable for everyday use. The abbess was sitting on a chair. There was an air of vitality about her. She stretched out her hands, beckoning the girl. Kitty came near and stood before her. "Is this the girl?" asked the abbess. The nuns nodded. "Has she been giving any instruction?" "The New Testament and some French," said Maria. "Can you already feel God in your heart?" asked the abbess. The nuns in a body turned their heads. Kitty looked at them, then turned her head back to the abbess and said, "God." They spoke in French and Kitty did not understand. Father, mother, son were the only words she knew. A few days before, she had recited them together with Maria. Then she was led out of the hall. Before she left, the abbess tried to ask her something, but seeing her confusion, did not pursue the question. Once again, there was quiet days. No closet was moved, no picture was taken down. Everything was wrapped in that serene silence which is found in deep walls. She recited the words and the conjugations, and in the afternoons, Maria would come in and read with her. Memory was inaccessible. It had sunk to the darkest recesses. Thus, in her 11th year, she made her first ardent contact with life. Slowly, as her vocabulary grew, her wonder blossomed. Her face took on the paleness which was common to all those who had lived here for many years, even the plants. Every month, some new line, gesture, facial expression was added. This development filled Maria's heart with rejoicing and anxiety. This human creature must have other qualities. What Maria did not reveal to Kitty, the walls would relate to her. The air in the room, the little statue, everything surged here, flowing and expanding. Who are you? We are angels. And who are you? Only now was he revealed to her. It was the face of a man. The rivulets of blood flowed as far as the angel's feet and from there to the windows. This was the first contact. He came to her from the concealed part of the picture, neither old nor young, but suffering. The next day, Kitty was sunk in deep contemplation. Curiosity died in her, and when she touched the copybook, the crude letters spoke to her. She passed her hand over them, trying to calm them. With Maria, she spoke little. Her poor vocabulary made communication impossible. But Maria sensed that in spite of the rapid progress which she had made, the child was slipping away from her. She therefore decided to improve her speech, to enable her to converse with her and thus penetrate to her inner life. For the girl was like a dumb being, weaving a life of her own in the inmost depths of her soul. Maria did note that the concepts of the Father, the Mother, and the Son were not unknown to her, and that when she uttered their names in broken syllables, a tremor of joy lifted up her eyes. A tremor of joy lighted up her eyes. Her life, however, was dumb and expressionless. It found no outlet in exclamations, questions, or anger. Once in a while, Maria would find her engrossed in a game. She played with the small square stones which she had removed from the crumbling mosaic at the entrance to the hall. For a moment, she looked like a child, but when she raised her eyes, they held a strange look. The abbess did not come. She left the convent to itself. The nuns worked as usual, and in the garden, the creepers, the roses, and the lawn came to life. Every murmur proclaimed growth. It seemed as if even the shade encouraged it. The windows were adorned with different colors, and when Maria said, "Spring has come," her voice rang with festivity. Maria's efforts were unrewarded. Kitty did recite the verses, reading and rereading with stubborn dedication, but her own words remained unsaid. Maria would say, "Speak," and Kitty would respond. Between utterances, the silence loomed large, a solid barrier. Summer came, and with it the change. Suddenly, like the transition from budding to blossoming, speech burst forth. It surged in her, colorful and wild, crystallizing into French words which flooded in her like caged birds trying to escape. They emerged only with the greatest effort, twittering syllables which took on meaning only by virtue of the voice, the fluency, and the intonation. You couldn't call them words. They didn't seem to come from the speech center. It was her whole being which spoke. The defect was now apparent. Maria had, in fact, suspected that there was something wrong with the child, but she had not said so specifically. Now the defect was prominent. Something in the child's movements, even more than in her voice, made it obvious that lack of words was not her only obstacle. Sometimes Maria asked herself whether she should not take the matter up with the abbess, as was customary in such cases. But this procedure, simple as it seemed, awakened doubts within her which made her postpone the decision. The first thing they would do would surely be to take the girl from her and put her in the charge of one of the older nuns. Old nuns were not very particular about their methods, convinced that sin stubbornly assails the young. They sometimes rebuke them in an effort to stimulate the positive forces. She decided to make the girl's life her own. She no longer sat beside her like a stranger, but observed her as if observing her own life. And thus, after many years of being a nun, she began to regard her life as one connected sequence in which every detail stood out, testifying clearly to growth and development. The days which followed brought no decisive changes. Maria felt that in her, too, something was dawning. It was a sort of compassion by virtue of which she wanted to bring the girl near to her, to make her happy, to tell her about herself. How attentive Kitty's eyes sometimes seemed, a slender body, a reluctant gesture, and sadness. One could not make her speak. The child spoke to herself, inventing phrases which did not exist in the language. Only daydreams and secret desires give rise to such meaningless combinations. Sometimes a sound escaped her, as if rent from the innermost recesses. The girl's clothes being bared something in Maria. She contemplated her own life. Sometimes it seemed to her that until now her own life had been moving in evasive superficiality, barely making contact. Finally, in a moment of weakness, it had been anchored and closed up, but without any essential change taking place. The years as a nun had brought no turning point. The vain desires of life died within her, but grace did not shine on her. Now, as a result of her meetings with the girl, she began to become aware of the deep hollowness within her. Her thoughts, even the most beautiful of them, seemed to float over the surface, never becoming part of her. Such feeling had recurred to her ever since childhood, and with successive consistency ran through her life like a chain whose links were well forged. Now, with the distance of years, her youth took shape within her remarkable concreteness. The street, the inn, the tavern, an impoverished family, the son sent off to the army, the daughters dispersed over many cities, and she, the youngest of them, finding herself in a convent. These were the bare facts, like scaffolding of the building. The rest were just details arriving from circumstance. One cannot sever oneself from one's thoughts, from the first sight seen, from oneself, from one's family, from one's sisters who had taken up a dubious profession. Gradually, she had realized that she was linked to them, that even in her solitude, or perhaps because she was here, she was linked to them as a kind of delegate who must render account. Sometimes she thought of her father, his stubbornness, the movement of his hand, whose abrupt motion she began to discern in her own manner. but not always. Sometimes her thoughts lay dormant and she worked industriously and devotedly, taking on that frozen expression that one assumes here. But in the hall with the girl, her thoughts surged up in her as if suddenly set free from some focal point to which they were bound. There was a crabapple tree in the garden, and Kitty sometimes sat beneath it. The scene was like a reproduction of one of the big paintings on the wall. Sister Maria, the girl would call, and Maria felt as if the Holy Infant herself was calling her. But gradually the secret came between them. The more questions Kitty asked, the larger it loomed. And my parents, Kitty once asked, "We have no parents. God is our Father." Excuse me. She had kept this sentence in her heart for many days, and only now did she utter it. She too wanted to be the child of God, like the girl, with no thoughts, with no defiled past. But when she tried to dismiss her thoughts, their full weight bore down upon her. But she wanted to protect the child in the good shade of prayer and holy studies, to have her become a nun, not because of external motives, to plant in her the realm of eternal silence. She began to be strict with Kitty. The war again stood at the gates of the convent. The soldiers set up a camp. Shots filled the night with terror. The walk stopped. Kitty remained in the hall, her entire world restricted to the confines of its stained glass windows. Only once a day in the twilight was she permitted to look out beyond the walls. Half-naked soldiers walked around near the huts. Gradually this scene, different in color, merged with the scenes inside until the contrast became blurred. She was filled with a peaceful sense of unity. Maria's presence filled her with warm intimacy. The abbess was forgotten. St. Matthew, St. Nicholas, and above all, the Holy Virgin became her friends. She could appeal to them even with the smallest requests. Then Kitty had other feelings. At first, they were physical sensations, not pleasant. Then a hardening.
Not unpleasant.
Not unpleasant. Then a hardening in her breast. She realized that something was stirring inside her. It seemed to be a sign for whose revelation she must wait patiently. How lovely it was to nestle under the blanket, pulling it over her head, and to feel the body's pulse, to listen to the sweet murmurs. She wanted to tell Maria about it, but something stopped her. The sweet secret to which she had loved to listen turned into heavy burden, which between dreams took on the form of a nightmare. She would sit at the back of the garden under the apple tree, watching the reddening fruit. Indoors, they were making preparations for the visit of the abbess. Again, the familiar squeaks were heard. Closets were moved from their usual places. Pictures were removed from the walls. On the lawn, a plaster bust, a lamp, and a shaky table were heaped together as if to embody a new combination of the sacred and the profane. Buxom maids were brought from the villages. Carrying brooms and brushes, they looked as if they were in charge of the place. Maria and Sister Catherine, who was older than she, took off their nun's habits and joined their efforts. Maria did not say much about the abbess, but what she said was so full of unadulterated praise that it aroused in Kitty a feeling of uneasiness, which was mingled with awe and even anxiety. Imprisoned as she was by her secret, the abbess's forthcoming visit filled her with foreboding. One day during the noon recess, Kitty chanced to speak with one of the maids. She was a big-boned, rather masculine-looking woman who had apparently had a difficult life. Her husband had first wanted to be a priest, but after becoming involved in a murder that had fled to Germany and enlisted in the army. She spoke fluently in a pleasant dialogue, often accompanied by gesticulations in which revulsion and joy alienated swiftly as in a game full of unpredictable changes. But she did not only tell about herself. She tried, with that peasant cunning which knows how to employ flattery when necessary, to find out about the girl. A girl in a convent, thought the peasants, was a phenomenon worth noting, for she had certainly not arrived by chance. Kitty told her that her parents had died in the war. This was the logical thing to say, for she could not tell her anything else, and besides, her new sensations seemed to point to this explanation. Sometimes she thought about it. Sometimes she saw herself as a child who had been left at the gate of a convent. But sometimes, near the sacred pictures, she would imagine that she was the child of God. Memory was of no help to her. Often this certainty filled her with satisfaction. Not everyone is lucky enough to be God's daughter, protected under his wing, she repeated to herself. Of course, the visit with the abbess and her meeting with her belied the fact that she occupied an honored position. Nevertheless, she did not lose the feeling of superiority which she had kept in her heart. Now, in the presence of the maid, in the face of the uninhibited confession, she had a feeling of sin, but also of seductive sweetness. Where did I come from? Maria's explanation seemed like a fairy tale, which was real and even believable. But at the same time, there was now a presence which required another explanation. It was a moment of transition, which only children experience at times. It was, as if it were, a realm of two truths, each with its own rights. Maria was busy with the housework and let the girl wander among the rubble, left to her own reflections. She realized only vaguely, if at all, that the girl was becoming wholly lost in them. The meetings with the maid were marvelous. Her speech was spiced with invective. Her body was buxom. As she swept the floor, Kitty felt the lightness and the nonchalance with which she walked around the hall, which had previously been dominated by silence. Usually their conversations took a rather practical turn. Peppy would speak, and when Kitty admitted that she felt a hardening in her breast, she had the feeling that she was only acknowledging something that Peppy herself had mentioned. The maid burst into a raucous, splattering laugh, as if her vocal cords had burst. From then, the conversation deteriorated. Peppy described the Germans encamped in the village without trying to hide her connections with them, and she spoke about other things which Kitty probably did not understand. But she felt a sort of strange sweetness which penetrated her gradually, destroying something of her own. The next day, everything was as usual. The maids were sent away, and Kitty woke up. The familiar silence was firmly established. The pictures hung in the hall. The smell of kerosene pervaded every corner. But it was not the same hall. Something had been taken away from it, from the corners, from the pictures. Her eyes looked at them, but all they saw were the drawings themselves. Maria was tired and did not notice the change. She was taken up with preparations for the visit of the abbess. What she did notice was a rebellious turn of the shoulder, which Kitty was unable to control. The next day, the signs of maturity burst forth. Kitty was full of shame. She tried to avoid Maria, and at night she fell on the bed as tears scalded her face. In her dream, Peppy appeared. In her torn dress, she looked like a creature dragged out of a murky river. The next day, the dream remained alive within her. During the late hours of the morning, as she sat over her copybook, she said to Maria, "I am a good girl," and Maria confirmed the fact with a caress. Later, Maria left the convent suddenly. It turned out that the abbess had sent for her. Maria packed her belongings, and while she stood for a moment, gazing at the shining lamps, she looked unusually thin. She turned her head, and Kitty noticed a sudden motion reflected in the bronze. The parting was very hasty, and as the gate creaked behind her, Kitty suddenly felt something had been taken away from her. Complete silence reigned as always in the noon hours. A dozing goat, a water basin, and picture frames were scattered around like creatures obliged to bear the weight of the heat, each in its own corner. The objects were familiar to her, but nevertheless a certain strangeness emanated from them. She had to become reacquainted with them. Left to herself, she wandered around the building, looking for an entrance to the small rooms which were hidden from view, living their lives for many years without anyone entering them. All the doors were locked, and through the bars nothing could be seen. Finally, she found Katrina sitting on the threshold. Thin, dressed in festive clothes, she seemed to be frozen in reflection. Katrina, called Kitty in embarrassment. Katrina was Maria's cousin. Steeped together as they were in faith, they had not become intimate according to the laws of love. The enmity which they had brought with them from home only deepened, and each day underscored their past. Here they had met. The hand of fate pursued them and had brought them together. When the matter had become known to the abbess, she had not been willing to separate them. She had ordered them to remain together. Kitty's heart was filled with compassion. She came near to Katrina, trying to find a suitable expression. Katrina rose slightly. She folded her dress around her and sat withdrawn in the corner of the step. Maria's gone, said Kitty. Aside from a few words about practical matters, Katrina said nothing. She could not hide her uneasiness in Kitty's presence. Finally, when there was nothing left to say, she went away with the excuse that she must go to prayers. This was a hint to Kitty that she too should be more pious. Kitty remained fixed in her place. She had bad dreams that night. She felt the heavy bell pressing down on her shoulders. And when the bell chimed 3, it was if the bell tongue swung inside. She rose and prayed, trying to break out the wall that closed in on her. Only toward morning did she discern a spark of reconciliation in the eyes of the crucified one. Peppy appeared in the morning like a good messenger from another world. With her torn dress and merry eyes, she was the embodiment of total abandon. She told Kitty that the front line was advancing. The soldiers were being concentrated in the neighborhood, their number increasing from day to day. It was obvious that she enjoyed the military preparations, the motions of her arms wide apart as if in an embrace indicated as much. Maria won't return. She won't be able to. The roads are blocked. The soldiers will break into the convent. There aren't enough sleeping quarters in the neighborhood. The abbess is worried. That's why she called her. They won't touch Katrina. Her being a nun and her anger have dried her up. That was the way Peppy spoke, a confusion of facts and desires. And what about me? Asked Kitty. Don't you be afraid of them. Tell them you belong to me. You belong to Peppy. They all know Peppy. I'll work for them in the canteen. Maybe you want to work there too. Together, Kitty? This war is going to finish us. We're going to die without having a bit of fun. We must take the golden lamps out of here. They'll be yours, mine. No, said Kitty, taken aback. No, repeated Peppy, drawling the word. No, you say. I have something to say to you. I have something to say to you also. You're a dirty Jew. They'll throw you into the convent, but I know. I saw it. Tomorrow they'll come and take you. You won't get away. You won't get away. You won't get away. You won't get away. These were not words. They were sounds escaping from a furious existence like barks until the gate closed them out with a bang. The gate was an iron gate crowned with barbed wire, and Kitty's eyes made out the 2 locks which were upon it. Kitty stood for a moment, turning her head away. Down in the valley, the soldiers were encamped. They encircled the mountain without leaving a gap. Half naked in the radiant sunlight, they looked like moving masses of flesh. On the parade field, soldiers marched to military tunes. It was like the scene depicted in the big picture hanging in the hall. Leaning against the wall, Maria had once told her about the Crusades, which had gone on for many years until the Crusaders had finally succeeded in redeeming the tomb of the sun. It was the same scene, even the colors similar. She was still agitated over the encounter with Pepe. Was she angry with me, or maybe she was just joking? But her heart told her otherwise. Katrina's room was locked. She did not dare to knock. She stood on the steps, touching the white marble. Gradually, the pattern began to emerge. At first, only meaningless details. Only later, as if aided by other sensation, it emerged and took shape. In the evening, when Katrina came in and told her that from now on she must remain in the cellar, she accepted the news calmly, as one who knows what is in store for her. Outside, the dusk was fading. The sky was redder than usual. A sharp, moldy smell greeted them. Jars of beets covered with white kerchiefs stood in a row on the shelves. They looked like frozen creatures in whom life was still stirring. They're looking for me. Katrina is hiding me. There was no longer any doubt. Now she visualized how they would find her. The door would open, light would blaze in, first on the jars, then on her. She came nearer to the jars. The bumbling of fermentation could be heard. Groping, she acquainted herself with the objects around her. Picture frames, broken statues, sacks of apples. She stretched out her hand and touched an apple. Its juice filled her. After a while, Katrina came down and told her that from now on she must remain here. And Kitty said she knew that it was written in the Holy Scriptures that the children of God must suffer until the light shines for them. But Katrina answered in a voice that sounded angry, that she must not pride herself on this belief. Am I a hairy Jew? Asked Kitty, Pepe's voice echoing in her ears. No answer was forthcoming. Katrina was already behind the door. Her steps echoed for a while and then were silent. Now all doubts vanished. Certainty formed the pattern. She stroked her skin and said, yes, I am hairy. Now she remembered that, even in the past, Pepe used to call her little Jewess as she pinched her cheek. Katrina, too, as she stood before the abbess, had said something of the kind. For many hours, she sat behind the bars, waiting for the light. Nothing was heard. The silence of the convent deepened. She felt the hair growing from within her, spreading around her neck and under her arms. Yes, I am hairy, she said, as if acknowledging a fact that there was no point in denying anymore. Who are you, jars? We are jars of beets, the voice answered. Our color got lost in the dark. Can you hear the song of fermentation? I hear, said Kitty. Am I hairy? You are not hairy. You are our sister. God is hiding us. Afterwards, she curled up on a pile of hay and fell asleep. Katrina came down to her, and Kitty told her that she felt well. She had many friends here. The beets were fermenting in the jars. The vishniak gave off an aroma of sanctity. Katrina said that the soldiers were encircling the mountain. They were encamped near the walls. Maria was on the way, but could not get there. In the convent, nothing changed. Kitty stretched out her hand, touching the starched dress. A tremor went through her. Now she knew that soon she would move to another place. Katrina spoke of other worlds, and Kitty asked for details, thinking it was the thing to do. The war was drawing to an end. A final ceremony was still needed. The convent almost begged to be broken into. Katrina said that it was not she who had hidden Kitty. At this, the soldiers burst out laughing. They no longer had the urge to kill. Now it was the game which intrigued them. Kitty had grown taller in the cellar, and when she was brought out into the light, dressed in her white nightgown. She looked even taller. The gown trailed behind her. She was led along narrow paths to the fence. How marvelous it all seemed, like floating in space. Now all the people were gone. Angels embraced her arms, and when the shot was heard, she stood for a moment, marveling at the miracle revealed.
All right. So does anybody want to say a word or two?
Well, as I was reading, I had the feeling that Kitty was a Jew, and that they were hiding her. The abbess knew that, but they protected her as long as they could. But she ended up dying in the end. But it seemed like it seemed like it was a calm thing. It wasn't like what happened in the camps. But she was still killed by the German soldiers.
Right. This is a little bit of a change from the usual context and scenery that we imagine when we talk about Holocaust stories. Yes, clearly she is a child who's being hidden. She apparently was given over by somebody, who cared, either her parents or somebody else, who tried to hope that maybe she would survive by being hidden in a convent. And, that's where she found herself. What else? What else do we?
But it's interesting that the first time the abbess came, the nuns cleaned themselves. The second time they came, they brought in maids from town, and that's where Kitty's, that's where Preppy knew she was a Jew and turned her in.
Yeah.
So why the second time did they have people come when they have maids come to clean when they didn't the first time? That doesn't make sense to me.
The more stories from the Shoah that you hear, the less sense anything makes.
Okay.
I don't think that there's any way to make something, logical happen here. This is what happened.
The translation is amazing. I mean, I don't know what the original is, but the poetry of the translations seems significantly more than usually translations accomplish.
Right. Well, Appelfeld was a stylistic master. He created a style, and this is a story, of course, with very, very little plot and drama, and a lot of. It's very quiet. It's very slow moving. It's very interior. It's it's all about slow, silent kinds of feelings and perceptions and subtle kinds of things. And that's there's a very low key quality to Appelfeld's writing in general. He writes from most of his oeuvre is based on Holocaust connected stories before the war, during the war, a little bit after, but with this kind of very controlled, slow, meticulous kind of language. And the translator here tried to be as faithful as they could to that. And I'm glad it came across to you.
It's so what's the word? It's so densely written in a way that she doesn't have much of a life, but you want to savor every word of the story because it's so beautifully constructed that it's like a life of its own in a way.
Right.
Well, sometimes when you're reading a story that's been translated, by the way the verbiage goes, but this went smoothly. You had to see, if the Hebrew wasn't on the other side, I might not have known that it had been translated.
Right.
It just read smooth.
Yeah, and Appelfeld's approach to trying to describe things, again, he doesn't need a lot of Sturm und Drang. He doesn't, the war is almost, irrelevant to the real drama that he's interested in, the real tangibility of seemingly meaningless details of life are for him so precious. And he tries to somehow convey that, and here's a person, we don't know if this person is damaged because she was damaged, in terms of from birth, or was the damage, the trauma of separating from her family? Was she really hurt by that separation? But the perception of Maria, here's a woman. I mean, here's the girl. She starts out, she's a younger girl. She's 11, then she starts entering into puberty, and we don't know exactly how long the time is that's elapsing here. Is it 1 year? Is it 5 years from the beginning of the war to the end of the war? Did she get placed in the convent, let's say in 1938 or 39 or 40, and now it's 1945? But the time is very, very hard to track, and what she has absorbed in her life is a mystery, right? It's a mystery, but it just hovers over there. The fact that what do we make of the relationship that she had with this young novitiate that was charged with taking care of her and with educating her? What do we seem to sense about what was going on between the two of them?
Almost like, you can't say mother and daughter, it's almost like an older sister who was looking after her because their parents weren't there.
Were they did she feel that close? Was there a sense of closeness from the beginning?
I think with Maria, yes.
So I think it develops. I think that there's a discovery process that goes on, both for Kitty and for Maria.
Mhm.
Maria in the beginning is doing her job. She's young. She likes the idea that she's got this special task that she's been entrusted with. And then she starts realizing things about herself, right? She's encountering this mystery, this human being who's so mysterious to her. She's ends up having so much of what she tries to impose upon this young girl bouncing back at her. And she ends up having to do her own cheshbon hanefesh, right? She has to do her own kind of soul searching and finding out what really is important to her, what means, what's meaningful to her. And then there's that very touching part where she decides, I'm not going to tell the abbess yet because she'll take Kitty away from me. And those other nuns, they're not going to be compassionate. They're not going to be sensitive to the fact that this is a special human being. Right? So she ends up having to keep that to herself and tries to keep on sort of cultivating or, growing this tender life, as much as she can. Of course, the surroundings are, if success will eventually be achieved, we'll have a wonderful young Christian girl who loves, the mother and the son and the father, and who sees the statue that's in all the rooms, of the face of this man looking down at her with love, and she'll be filled with love. And that will be her gateway to life. What do we make about that last ending when she is taken out, she's shot, she's executed? Let's see if I can go back there. Yeah, Merle.
Well, I was going to say, throughout the story until the very end, there was all this indoctrination going on. And, I didn't like it. But in the end, she died without this horrible fear and sort of, almost like a martyr walking towards her death. So in some ways, that was a relief that she had absorbed some of that stuff,
Yeah.
I guess.
I felt like it wasn't indoctrination as much as a way to help hide her, right? To like, that's how I took it, was that they were had to equip her in case she, you know, does she know any words in French, and does she, because it wasn't just about religious stuff. There was a little bit of what French words does she speak? They wanted her to pass,
Well,
right? Because
that's,
she probably spoke Yiddish and Hebrew or something.
yeah, we don't know what she spoke. And apparently she didn't speak very much. But the background for these kinds of, for this story, for these kinds of situations, and there were many such situations. Background is a very complicated and tragic background, because when you say within a church context that you want to save this person, it has layers of meaning, right? It doesn't just mean, oh, let's save the life of this person so that they don't die, they don't get captured, they don't get executed. Saving this child, certainly in the 40s in the church. Let's remember, the church that we know today is not the same church that existed during the Shoah. The church that we know today had to learn deep lessons from what happened in the Shoah and change a lot of what it believed in and how it engaged in relating to other people. But in the time of the church's activities in the war years during the Shoah, the norm was the way you save this person is by saving their soul, is by washing them with the blood of Jesus and getting them to accept that. There were many, many painful stories after the war of parents who had, tried to save their children by giving them over to a convent, to a church, and so on. And then when they came back to get them, if they survived, they couldn't get them. They weren't able to retrieve their children. And sometimes their children didn't want to rejoin them because they didn't want to be with a Jewish person. Their normal experience, very, naturally, understandably, was what they grew up with, the surrounding of love and faith, and literally a different language, a different way of looking at the world, was what the only thing that they knew. What she talks about, am I hairy, right? Am I this hairy Jew, right? There's this kind of sense, again, on the one hand, she's awakening to the wonder of her body, to being the very, very, first, moments of being a young woman, and her, maturity just starting to be felt, and feelings of pleasure and feelings of physical wonder in what's happening to her. And then she's being given a language of physical disgust, right? That is she possessing this beautiful secret of life, or is she a disgusting, subhuman creature called a Jew? And she's subject to these things. She's the innocent, right? She is the one who is innocent, and everyone around her is acting upon her with an agenda, with a set of convictions, beliefs, biases, and she is defenseless almost in how she is subjected to those things. What is she supposed to believe in? What is she not supposed to believe in?
She's completely defenseless.
She's great.
I mean,
She is great. Her and Maureen, I
she
both
has
like them both
she
a
has
lot.
no resistance of any kind at all.
So I wanted
How
to talk
could
about a project
Yeah,
that came
how
in,
could she?
and I
I
don't
don't
know like on
understand.
pricing, and that's where I wanted
ahead.
to pick your brain.
Somebody's not muted, and we're hearing another conversation.
Oh, it's Adrian on the other
it's
phone.
site-
Adrian, mute yourself. So that's all. Hi, Adrian. So anyway, yeah, she's totally defenseless. And of course, that's part of what I did. Is it something I said? I just drove her out of the room.
She's going out so we can
Yeah,
talk, I
I
guess.
see, yes. And of course, on the one hand, he's very quotidian. He's very specific about whatever he deals with. He deals with very much the specifics of this moment, this person, this place, this smell, and so on. On the other hand, it gets so saturated with a kind of a symbolic meaning. And, she is, in a certain sense, a Christ figure, and a Christ figure in the original sense of the suffering Jew. The suffering Jew who is put upon, set upon by the world because she's too good, because she is, simply, not trying to harm anyone, not trying to advance anything. She's just her.
I didn't understand Pippi. Is Pippi the name? I can't remember
Peppy,
now.
yeah, Peppy.
Pippi.
Peppy's a
I didn't-
peasant woman. Peppy's a peasant woman. She's going to try to survive. The soldiers are a source of money for her.
Right, but she seems,
She doesn't mind sleeping with them if
Right.
that's going to get it. If that's going to, first of all, it might be fun. And also she'll make a couple of dollars.
but she seems inclined towards Kitty,
She
to
likes
come
Kitty.
along with me, and
Right. She
and then it
likes-
turns, but
It turns because in the end she's
She
also
says no.
she's an anti-Semite. She's a victim of her upbringing and of her culture as well.
mhm.
And that's what happens all over the place in Europe, during this time. There are people that in and of themselves, they're just good, simple, good-hearted people, but they've got this ingrained, bias, prejudice, hatred, and it can turn on a dime.
We have a lot of that going on now.
We have a lot of
Yeah.
our own country going on right now and in the rest of the world. So yeah, Peppy is exactly that kind of like, every person, right? Every woman, every man out there in the countryside. And is a source of wonder and excitement for Kitty. And then of course, she in the end might be the person who's the informer.
I would think so.
Right? She might be the one who
Seems
tells the
implied.
soldiers that there is this Jew being hidden by the convent, because otherwise they may never have discovered her.
It's
that-
interesting. It's interesting that the abbess sends for Maria and they can't get back. It's almost as if the abbess knew that Kitty would be discovered and wanted to save Maria. And because you don't know what the Germans would have done once they realized that the nuns were harboring a Jew.
Yeah.
Maria has a sketchy past, though. Like,
So, I mean, we
Right.
did a presentation.
it seems like I was wondering if maybe the abbess got her out of there so she wouldn't be in proximity to young soldiers. Like
Could be, it could be, right. And apparently she's not a full nun yet, right?
Mhm.
Like Katrina.
Oh, yeah, that's a
Right.
good point.
She hadn't,
didn't think
she
about
hasn't
that.
fully absorbed all of that. She had things that were still needed to be worked out. And of course, that's part of what Kitty was unsettling for her about, was that, Kitty was so authentically innocent, and she didn't see that, in her own heart. All right, a little tantalizing taste of a story.
Yeah.
So I look forward to us.
Thank you. That was a good one.
Thank you. As opposed to all the other ones, right?
Oh no, there's something deeper about this one than the other
Yeah.
ones that
Well,
that is
this is-
easily accessible to
This
me.
is not just a good
So that-
writer. Not just a good story. This is a great writer.
Yeah, there's some. It just
All right.
is accessible.
Be well.